In the town of Bitter Creek, where hope went to die and daughters were bartered like cattle, Rosalind Whitmore stood on the auction block with dirt under her fingernails and fire in her eyes, the last unsold girl in a marketplace that had already claimed her four sisters. The morning sun beat down merciless on the makeshift platform, turning the wooden planks into a griddle that seared through Rosalind's thin-soled boots. Around her, the crowd of men shifted and murmured, their voices a low rumble like distant thunder. She kept her chin high, though her hands trembled against her faded blue dress, the same dress her sister Grace had worn 3 months ago before. The railroad man from Denver claimed her with a handful of silver coins. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" Jeremiah Colt's voice boomed across the square, his gold tooth catching the light as he grinned. The auctioneer had grown fat on the misery of desperate families, trading flesh for coin in a land where women were scarce as rain. Strong back, good teeth, and looky here, she's got all her fingers. Rosalind's jaw clenched. Strong back. As if she were a mule to be evaluated for field work. As if the calluses on her palms from years of washing clothes and tending gardens were marks of value rather than survival. She remembered when Papa first mentioned the arrangement, how his eyes couldn't meet hers, how his voice cracked when he spoke of the drought that killed their crops and the debt that would kill their family. $5, called out a voice from the crowd. 7, shouted another. The bidding rose like fever, each number another nail in the coffin of her childhood. She scanned the faces below, weathered ranchers with tobacco-stained beards, shopkeepers with soft hands and harder eyes, drifters whose intentions she dared not consider. Where her sisters had wept, Rosalind burned. Where they had begged, she stood silent as stone. $15, shouted a burly man with a silver belt buckle. She'll birth me fine sons. The words hit Rosalind like a physical blow. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the morning Grace had been sold, how her sister had reached for her hand one last time, whispering, "Promise me you'll find a way to bloom, even in the wasteland." Grace had always been the dreamer, the one who believed in fairy tales. Now she was gone, swallowed by the endless prairie with a man who smelled of whiskey and broken promises. $20, came another bid. 25. Rosalind's father stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Thomas Whitmore had been a proud man once, before the bank notice, before the failing crops, before he'd made peace with the devil that wore Jeremiah Colt's face. He'd sold Mary first, sweet Mary who sang like a mockingbird and cried when she stepped on flowers. Then Catherine, who could calculate figures faster than any man in the territory. Then Grace with her gentle hands and healing touch. Finally, Ruth, barely 16, who'd gone to a mine owner in Colorado territory. Each sale had carved something away from Papa's soul. But the land needed saving, and men needed wives, and daughters were the only currency they had left. $30. The crowd stirred. $30 was good money for a bride, even in these lean times. Rosalind felt the weight of their stares, the hunger in their eyes. She was 19, past the bloom of youth by frontier standards, but still young. Enough to bear children and work the hard-scrabble land that broke men's backs and women's hearts. 40. A new voice cut through the murmur. The crowd turned. A man stepped forward from the shadows of the general store, and Rosalind felt her breath catch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the morning light and eyes the color of storm clouds. Unlike the others, he didn't look at her like she was livestock to be appraised. His gaze met hers with something that might have been respect, or perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit. $40, he repeated, his voice steady and sure. For the lady's hand in marriage. Lady. The word hung in the air like a benediction. When had anyone called her that? When had anyone seen her as more than a burden, a commodity, a problem to be solved? Well, Jeremiah Colt rubbed his hands together. $40 from the mysterious stranger. Do I hear 45? The man's jaw tightened. $50. Final offer. A gasp went up from the crowd. $50 was a fortune, more than most men made in 3 months of honest work. The other bidders fell silent, defeated by the stranger's confidence and deep pockets. $50. Colt's voice rang with triumph. Going once, going twice. Rosalind stared at the man who would claim her. He was older than her, perhaps 30 or more, with lines around his eyes that spoke of sorrow and sun. There was something in his bearing that reminded her of her father before the world had broken him, a quiet dignity that couldn't be bought or sold. Sold. Colt's gavel came down with finality. To the gentleman in black. The crowd began to disperse, but Rosalind couldn't move. The stranger walked toward the platform, each step deliberate and measured. When he reached the wooden steps, he held out his hand to help her down. "Name's Daniel Blackwood," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "And you won't be sorry, Miss Whitmore. I promise you that." His hand was warm and calloused, steady as bedrock. For the first time in months, Rosalind felt something other than despair. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the absence of terror. But as Daniel Blackwood led her away from the auction block, she caught sight of a figure watching from the saloon doorway. A man with pale eyes and a sheriff's badge, his expression dark as winter storm clouds. Something told her that her troubles were just beginning. Daniel Blackwood's wagon creaked along the dusty trail leading away from Bitter Creek, each turn of the wheels carrying Rosalind further from everything she'd ever known. The silence between them stretched like a taut rope, broken only by the rhythmic clip-clop of his horses and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. She studied her new husband from the corner of her eye. His hands were gentle, with the reins, but she could see the scars that mapped his knuckles, old wounds from honest work or harder battles. The wedding band on his finger caught the afternoon light, and she wondered about the woman who'd worn its match. Daniel had claimed her at the altar not an hour ago, their vows spoken in the cramped back room of Preacher Morrison's house, while the ink dried on papers that made her his legal property. "You're wondering about her," Daniel said suddenly, his voice cutting through her thoughts like a blade through silk that Rosalind's cheeks burned. "I don't know what you mean. My first wife, Margaret." He shifted the reins to one hand, the other resting on his knee. "She died birthing our son. Both of them gone in one terrible night, 2 winters past." The pain in his voice was raw as a fresh wound. Rosalind felt something twist in her chest, not jealousy, but a kind of recognition. They were both refugees from loss, both trying to build something new from the ashes of what had been. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been hell on earth," he finished. "But that's behind us now. We've got to look forward, you and I." The wagon crested a hill, and Rosalind gasped. Before them spread a valley green as emerald, with a creek winding through it like a silver ribbon. A modest house sat nestled among cottonwood trees, its windows catching the late afternoon sun. Behind it, cattle grazed in pastures that stretched to the horizon, and she could see the neat rows of what might have been a vegetable garden. "This is home," Daniel said, and there was pride in his voice. "The Blackwood Ranch. Been in my family for 15 years. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything Rosalind had dared to hope for. After the cramped soddy where she'd grown up, where 5 sisters had shared 2 beds and privacy was as rare as rain, this looked like paradise. But as they descended into the valley, she noticed details that made her stomach tighten. The barn door hung askew on its hinges. Weeds choked the garden. The house itself seemed to sag with neglect, as if it had been holding its breath for 2 years, waiting for life to return. "It's been just me since." Daniel's voice trailed off. "I reckon it shows." "Nothing that can't be fixed," Rosalind said quickly. "With time and work." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She squared her shoulders. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Blackwood. I've been working since I could hold a scrub brush." Something like relief softened his expression. "Daniel. Just Daniel, if you please. And I reckon you've got your own ghosts to wrestle with." The wagon rolled to a stop before the front porch, and Daniel climbed down to help her alight. His hands were steady at her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the clean scent of his soap and see the gold flecks in his storm-gray eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for calling me a lady back there. For not letting him sell me to Jeremiah Colt's a snake," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "And some of those men bidding, well, let's just say they weren't looking for wives so much as unpaid servants. You deserved better than that." Deserved. The word sat strange on her tongue. When had she ever thought about what she deserved? Survival had been enough, and barely that. Daniel shouldered her small bundle of possessions. Everything she owned in the world fit in a flour sack, and led her up the porch steps. The front door stuck, and he had to put his shoulder to it before it groaned open. Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with two worn chairs facing it. The kitchen was small but functional, with a cast-iron stove and a pump that Daniel worked to bring up clear water. Upstairs, she glimpsed two bedrooms through open doors. "I'll take the small room," Daniel said quickly, following her gaze. "The big one, it's got better light. For sewing or reading, if you've a mind to." The kindness in his voice made her throat tight. He was offering her the master bedroom, the room he'd shared with his first wife. It was more consideration than she'd expected from a stranger, more gentleness than she'd known from her own father. "In recent years, Daniel," she began, but he held up a hand. "I won't lie to you, Rosalind. I bought you fair and square because I need help with this place. But I won't force myself on you. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you'll let me know. Until then, we're partners in this endeavor. Nothing more, nothing less." Partners. The word tasted like possibility on her tongue. She'd been a daughter, a sister, a burden. She'd never been a partner in anything. "I can cook," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I can clean and mend and tend a garden. I can milk cows and gather eggs, and I'm sure you can do all that and more." Daniel set her bundle on the kitchen table. "But right now, I'm thinking you might want to sit a spell. It's been a long day." Before she could protest, he was moving around the kitchen with surprising efficiency, lighting the stove, pumping water into a kettle, retrieving cups from a cupboard. His movements were economical, practiced, a man who'd learned to care for himself in the wake of unthinkable loss. "Tea?" he asked, holding up a tin. "Please." She sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave. The auction block, the leering faces, the moment when Daniel had stepped forward like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to pray at as he worked. She found herself studying him. The way his dark hair curled slightly at the collar. The careful way he measured tea leaves, as if the simple act of making tea was a ritual worth doing well. The wedding ring that caught the light when he moved his hand. "You're thinking loud," he said without turning around. "I'm thinking about how strange this all is. This morning I was." She paused, searching for words. "I was nothing. Nobody. And now I'm Mrs. Daniel Blackwood, mistress of a ranch, partner in an endeavor." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real." He turned to face her, and his expression was serious. "But it's also fragile. Like a newborn colt, strong enough to stand, but one wrong step could break everything." The kettle whistled, and he poured hot water over the tea leaves. The familiar ritual was comforting, normal in a day that had been anything but. "There's something else," Daniel said as he set a cup before her. "Something you need to know about Sheriff Hawkins." Rosalind's blood chilled. "The man who was watching from the saloon?" "The same. He's been sniffing around here since Margaret died, making offers on the ranch. When I wouldn't sell, he started making threats. Nothing direct, mind you. Just suggestions about what might happen to a man living alone with no protection. And now," Daniel's jaw tightened, "now you're here. And Hawkins doesn't like complications to his plans." Outside, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley, growing steadily closer. The hoofbeats grew louder, a steady drumbeat that made Rosalind's pulse quicken. Daniel moved to the window, his hand falling instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, a gesture so natural she realized he'd been wearing death on his belt all along. "3 riders," he said quietly. "Hawkins and his deputies." Rosalind set down her teacup with trembling fingers. "What do they want?" "To remind me who holds the real power in this county." Daniel's voice carried the bitter edge of experience. "Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to." The riders reined up outside with a jingle of spurs and leather. Heavy boots thudded across the porch, and then came the knock. 3 sharp raps that sounded more like a demand than a request. Daniel opened the door, his frame filling the doorway like a barrier between his new wife and whatever darkness waited. Outside, "Sheriff Hawkins, what brings you to my ranch? Heard you got yourself hitched today, Blackwood." The sheriff's voice was silk over steel, smooth and dangerous. "Thought I'd come by to congratulate the happy couple." "Kind of you." Now if you'll excuse us, now hold on there. Sheriff Hawkins pushed past Daniel into the house, his pale eyes scanning the room until they found Rosalind. This must be the bride. The last Whitmore girl, ain't you? Rosalind forced herself to meet his gaze, though everything in her wanted to shrink back. Hawkins was a tall man with the kind of cruel handsomeness that drew women like moths to flame, until they got too close and realized the light was meant to burn. His star-shaped badge gleamed against his black vest, but there was nothing lawful about the way he looked at her. Mrs. Blackwood, she corrected, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Mrs. Blackwood. He tasted the name like wine. Fancy that. Yesterday you were merchandise on Jeremiah Colt's auction block, and today you're the lady of the manor. That's enough. Daniel's voice cut through the air like a blade. State your business or get off my land. Hawkins smiled, showing teeth white as tombstones. My business is keeping the peace in this county, and I'm concerned about the stability of this arrangement. What's that supposed to mean? Well now, a man buys himself a wife sight unseen, brings her out to this isolated ranch. Hawkins shrugged. Things can go wrong in situations like that. A woman might find herself in circumstances she didn't bargain for. Might need protection. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Rosalind felt her stomach clench as she understood the game being played. Hawkins wasn't offering protection. He was offering her a reason to need it. I'm perfectly safe with my husband, she said, stepping closer to Daniel. Thank you for your concern. Are you, though? Hawkins moved closer, and she caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. See, I knew Daniel's first wife. Sweet little Margaret. She was real happy too, right up until she died screaming in childbirth. Daniel's hand tightened on his gun. You son of a, easy now. Hawkins held up his hands, but his smile never wavered. I'm just saying, terrible things happen to women out here. Accidents. Illness. Sometimes they just disappear. Get out. Daniel's voice was deadly quiet. Now, I'll go. But Mrs. Blackwood, Hawkins tipped his hat to Rosalind. You remember what I said. A woman alone out here, she needs friends. Men who can protect her when her husband can't. He sauntered toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Daniel, that banknote on your ranch. It's coming due soon. Real soon. Be a shame if you couldn't make the payment. The door slammed shut behind him, and Rosalind heard the riders departing. But the poison of Hawkins' words lingered in the air like the scent of sulfur. Daniel, she began, but he was already moving, checking the windows, securing the door. He's right about one thing, Daniel said grimly. You are alone out here. If something happened to me, nothing's going to happen to you. But even as she said it, Rosalind felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The town was even further, and Sheriff Hawkins wore the badge that was supposed to protect her. There's something I need to tell you, Daniel said. About the banknote. About why I really bought you today. Rosalind's heart clenched. What do you mean? I need the money. Your father paid me $200 to take you off his hands. Daniel's words fell like stones into still water. The bank's foreclosing on the ranch next month unless I can come up with the payment. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Of course it had been too good to be true. The kindness, the respect, the promise of partnership, all of it bought and paid for with her father's desperation. So I'm not a wife, she said quietly. I'm an investment. No, Daniel crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Maybe. It started that way. But what I said before, about being partners, I meant that. Every word. How can I believe you? The question tore from her throat. How can I believe anything? Because I could have taken your father's money and treated you like a servant. I could have forced you to my bed and used you however I pleased. Instead, I'm standing here telling you the truth, even though it might make you hate me. Rosalind stared at him, searching his face for lies. But all she saw was a man as trapped as she was, trying to build something decent from desperate circumstances. The money won't be enough, she said finally. $200 against a ranch this size? It's not enough. No, it's not. Daniel's hands fell away from her shoulders. I was hoping maybe we could make it work. Together. Find a way to save the ranch and build something real. And if we can't, if Hawkins gets his way, Daniel's jaw tightened, then we'll lose everything. The ranch, the cattle, the house. Everything my family built, everything Margaret and I dreamed of, gone. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Rosalind felt the first drops of rain against the windows. A storm was coming, and she had the sudden, terrible certainty that it would wash away more than just the dust of the day. "There's one more thing," Daniel said quietly. "About your sisters. The ones who were sold before you." Rosalind's blood turned to ice. "What about them?" "Ruth, the youngest one. She never made it to Colorado." Daniel's voice was heavy with reluctance. "Her buyer, he had an accident on the trail. Both of them died." The words hit her like a physical blow. Ruth, sweet Ruth who had been afraid of the dark and slept with a cornhusk doll. Ruth, who had cried when Papa announced the auctions, but had gone quietly because she thought it would help the family. "How do you know this?" Rosalind whispered. "Because I was supposed to be the one to take her to Colorado. I was supposed to deliver her to that monster." Daniel's voice cracked. "But I couldn't do it. I couldn't hand over a child to be used and broken. So I told them she'd run away." Rosalind stared at him, her mind reeling. You saved her?" "I tried to. But she's still out there somewhere, alone and scared, and I don't know if she's alive or dead." The room spun around her. Ruth was alive. Ruth was free. And the man who had bought her at auction, the man she'd married, had been protecting her sister all along. But as the storm clouds gathered overhead, a new sound reached them through the thunder, the distant crack of gunfire, coming from the direction of town. The gunfire echoed across the valley like thunder, but this thunder carried the promise of blood. Daniel was already moving, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace and checking the cylinder of his Colt. "Stay in the house," he commanded, his voice tight with urgency. "Bar the door behind me. If anyone comes who ain't me, you shoot first and ask questions later." "Wait." Rosalind caught his arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle beneath his shirt. "Where are you going?" "That shooting's coming from your father's place. If Hawkins is cleaning house." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Your father knows too much about the auctions, about who paid what. Dead men tell no tales." The implication hit her like a sledgehammer. Papa, weak, broken Papa who had sold his daughters to save his land, was in danger because he could expose the corruption that ran through Bitter Creek like poison through veins. "I'm coming with you." Rosalind was already moving toward her bundle, searching for the small derringer Papa had given her years ago. "He's my father." "No." Daniel's voice brooked no argument. "It's too dangerous. And if something happens to me, you need to be alive to tell the world what really happened here. And if something happens to you, I'll be alone with Hawkins." She found the derringer, checked its load with hands that shook. "Only slightly. I'd rather die fighting beside you than live cowering from him." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, surprise giving way to respect, respect warming into something deeper. "You're not what I expected, Rosalind Blackwood." "Good. I'm tired of being what people expect." The ride to the Whitmore homestead took 20 minutes through the gathering storm, their horses splashing through mud and fighting the wind that howled across the prairie. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark black and white, and with each flash Rosalind caught glimpses of their destination, the ramshackle soddy where she'd grown up, where her sisters had dreamed of better lives. But as they crested the final hill, she saw that those dreams had been buried in smoke and flame. The house was burning. Orange tongues of fire licked at the sod walls and wooden frame, and through the broken windows, she could see the glow of destruction consuming everything she'd ever known. The barn had already collapsed, sending sparks dancing into the storm dark sky. "Papa!" The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. Daniel caught her horse's bridle before she could spur forward. "Wait. Look." 3 horses stood near the burning building, their riders black silhouettes against the flames. Sheriff Hawkins sat easy in his saddle, watching the fire with the satisfaction of a man who'd finished unpleasant but necessary work. His deputies flanked him, their guns drawn and ready. "Where is he?" Rosalind whispered. "Where's my father?" As if summoned by her words, a figure stumbled from behind the burning barn. Thomas Whitmore moved like a man in a nightmare, his clothes torn and bloody, his face a mask of pain and terror. In his arms he carried something, a bundle wrapped in an old quilt. Hawkins spurred his horse forward, cutting off Thomas's escape. Well, look what crawled out of the fire." "Please," Thomas gasped. "She's just a child." She ain't done nothing wrong. Rosalind's heart stopped. The bundle in her father's arms moved, and she caught a glimpse of red gold hair and frightened blue eyes. Ruth. Sweet, innocent Ruth, who was supposed to be dead, who Daniel had saved and hidden and somehow brought back to this moment of reckoning. A child who's supposed to be dead, Hawkins said coldly. A child whose death I reported to the territorial authorities. Kind of awkward, her being alive. I'll take her away, Thomas pleaded. Far away. Nobody'll ever know. Oh, but they will know. Because Daniel Blackwood couldn't keep his mouth shut. Hawkins's voice carried across the wind like a curse. Because he had to play hero, had to save the girl, had to disrupt my carefully laid plans. One of the deputies leaned in his saddle. What do you want us to do with them, Sheriff? Same thing we did with the others. Clean up loose ends. The deputy raised his rifle, and Thomas clutched Ruth tighter, his body curving around her like a shield. In that moment, Rosalind saw her father not as the weak man who had sold his daughters, but as the protector he had always tried to be. A man who had made terrible choices to save his family, who would die before he let harm come to the child in his arms. No. Rosalind spurred her horse forward before Daniel could stop her, her derringer raised. The small gun cracked like a whip, and the deputy's rifle went spinning from his hands as her bullet found its mark. Chaos erupted. Hawkins wheeled his horse around, his own gun clearing leather with deadly speed. The remaining deputy fired wild, his shot going wide as his horse shied from the flames. Daniel's rifle boomed, and the man toppled from his saddle, but Hawkins was faster, deadlier. His aim true as death itself. Rosalind saw the muzzle flash, felt the bullet burn past her cheek. Her horse screamed and went down, throwing her hard against the muddy ground. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Daniel roar like a wounded bear. His rifle spoke again, and Hawkins grunted as the bullet took him high in the shoulder, spinning him in his saddle. But the sheriff stayed mounted, his gun swinging toward Thomas and Ruth. Should have minded your own business, Blackwood. Hawkins snarled. Now you get to watch them all die. Time slowed to honey. Rosalind saw Hawkins's finger tighten on the trigger, saw her father's eyes close in prayer, saw Ruth's small face turn toward her, recognition and hope warring with terror. She rolled, came up running, threw herself between Hawkins's gun and her family. The bullet meant for her father took her in the side, spinning her around and sending her to her knees. But she was still moving, still fighting, her derringer coming up for one last shot. The small gun barked, and Sheriff Hawkins pitched backward off his horse, clutching his chest. He hit the ground hard and lay still, his pale eyes staring sightless. At the storm-torn sky, silence fell, broken only by the crack of burning timber and the sound of Ruth crying. Daniel was beside Rosalind in an instant, his hands pressing against the bleeding wound in her side. You crazy, brave, impossible woman, he whispered. What were you thinking? I was thinking. She gasped as pain flared through her ribs. I was thinking about what you said. About being partners. About building something real. Thomas stumbled toward them, Ruth still clutched in his arms. The old man's face was streaked with tears and soot. Rosalind? Oh God, what have I done? What have I done to my girls? You saved her, Rosalind whispered, looking at Ruth's frightened but living face. When it mattered most, you saved her. Daniel's shirt was already torn into strips, his hands gentle as he bound her wound. We need to get you to a doctor. The nearest doctor's in Cheyenne, Thomas said hopelessly. 3 days ride. Then we ride. Daniel lifted Rosalind in his arms, and she felt the strength in him, the determination. That would not bend or break. Ruth, can you sit a horse? The girl nodded, her voice small but steady. Yes, sir. Good girl. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. We're going home. All of us. But as they prepared to leave the burning ruins of the past behind, Rosalind saw something in the distance that made her blood run cold. A line of riders approaching through the storm, their torches flickering like devil's eyes in the darkness. The approaching riders materialized from the storm like phantoms, their torches casting dancing shadows across the muddy ground. Daniel's rifle was already in his hands, but Rosalind caught his arm with her free hand. Wait, she gasped through the pain in her side. Look at their formation. The riders weren't approaching with the predatory caution of outlaws. They rode in a disciplined line, two by two, and as lightning split the sky, Rosalind caught the glint of silver badges and the blue of cavalry uniforms. Federal marshals, Thomas breathed. Someone sent word to Cheyenne. The lead rider pulled up before them, a weathered man with kind eyes and a gray mustache. I'm Marshal William Garrett, Territorial Authority. We received word about corruption in your sheriff's department. His gaze fell on Hawkins's still form. Looks like we're too late to arrest him. Not too late to save what matters, Daniel said, his arm tightening around Rosalind. Sheriff Hawkins was running a slave trade, selling women and covering up murders. The whole county government's rotten. Marshal Garrett dismounted, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. The burning homestead, the bodies, the wounded woman in Daniel's arms. We've been tracking this for months. Had reports from Denver about missing brides, families who never heard from their daughters again. He looked at Ruth, who still clung to Thomas's hand. This the girl who was supposed to be dead? Ruth Whitmore. Daniel confirmed. Hawkins reported her killed in a staged accident. She's been hidden on my ranch for 2 months. And you? Garrett turned to Rosalind. You're the one who sent the letter. Rosalind blinked in confusion. I didn't send any letter. Margaret did. The voice came from behind them, soft but clear. A young woman emerged from the group of marshals, her blue dress muddy from the ride, but her spine straight as a rifle barrel. My name's Margaret Blackwood, Daniel's late wife. The world tilted. Daniel's face went white as fresh snow, and his arms tightened around Rosalind so hard she gasped. That's impossible. You died. I buried you. You buried someone else, my love. Someone who died in my place while I was hiding from the men who wanted to kill us both. Margaret's voice was steady, but tears streamed down her face. Hawkins discovered I was collecting evidence about the auctions. He came to the house that night, planning to silence me. But our neighbor's daughter, poor Anna Brewster, had come seeking help with her difficult labor. When Hawkins and his men arrived, she closed her eyes, the pain of memory etched in every line of her face. Anna died giving birth to a stillborn child. In the darkness and confusion, with the house on fire, Hawkins thought it was me. I let him think it. I took Anna's baby, our baby that I delivered, and I ran. Our baby. Daniel's voice cracked like ice in spring. Margaret smiled through her tears. Our son, Daniel. Thomas Samuel Blackwood. He's 2 years old, and he has your eyes and your stubborn chin. From behind the marshals, a small boy peered out, clinging to the hand of a deputy's wife. Dark hair, storm gray eyes, and a solemn expression. That was pure Daniel Blackwood. The world spun, and Rosalind felt herself sliding away from consciousness. The blood loss, the shock, the impossibility of it all. She couldn't hold on anymore. But as darkness claimed her, she heard Daniel's voice, broken and wondering. My son. My wife. My God, what have I done? 3 weeks later, Rosalind woke to sunlight streaming through clean windows and the scent of fresh bread baking in the kitchen below. The wound in her side had healed to a dull ache, and for the first time since the shooting, she felt strong enough to sit up without the world spinning. The Blackwood Ranch house hummed with life. Voices drifted up from the kitchen, Margaret's gentle tones mixing with Ruth's delighted laughter and the deeper rumble of men's voices. Through the window, she could see Daniel working in the garden with his son perched on his shoulders, both of them covered in dirt and grinning. That a soft knock came at the door, and Margaret entered carrying a tea tray. She was beautiful, truly beautiful, with golden hair and the kind of serene loveliness that belonged in paintings. But there was steel beneath the silk, a strength that had allowed her to survive 2 years of hiding and emerge to reclaim her life. How are you feeling? Margaret asked, setting the tray on the bedside table. Like a fool, Rosalind said honestly. I married your husband. You saved my family. Margaret's voice was firm. You saved Ruth, you saved my husband, and you helped expose the corruption that would have destroyed this whole territory. You're a hero, not a fool. I'm a woman who fell in love with a man who was never mine to love. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, love isn't something that diminishes when it's shared. Daniel cares for you, deeply, and I'm grateful to you for bringing him back to life when I couldn't be here to do it myself. What happens now? Rosalind asked. The marriage isn't legal, with you being alive. I have nowhere to go, no family except Ruth. You have us. Margaret's smile was radiant. Do you think we'd let you leave? Ruth adores you. Thomas is finally healing from his guilt. And Daniel, well, Daniel needs all the help he can get. Running this ranch. I don't understand. The territorial governor has granted Daniel an annulment on the grounds of extraordinary circumstances. But he's also offered you a teaching position in the new school they're building in Bitter Creek. It comes with a house and a good salary. Margaret's eyes twinkled. And it's only 5 miles from here. Rosalind stared at her. You're offering me a new life. I'm offering you the life you've always deserved. Ruth will live here with us. She needs the stability, but you'll see her. Every day, you'll be part of our family, part of our community. You'll have independence and purpose and people who love you. From outside came the sound of Daniel's laughter as his son shrieked with delight, and Rosalind felt something bloom. In her chest, something warm and bright and alive. I never dreamed. She began.